Hello, this is the Green Corn Rebellion Show. I'm Gregory Harden II, and today I am here with my friend John Waldron. He is the state representative for District, I want to say it's 77, correct?
77,
Yeah.
luckiest district in Oklahoma.
All right. And you're also a member of Democratic leadership in the House,
Mhm.
correct? What is that position?
I'm the caucus vice chair.
Okay.
So I assist the caucus chair in holding our caucus meetings.
Thank you for coming on. How are you doing today?
Doing great. It's a good day. I'm excited about the upcoming session and spoiling for a fight.
Yeah. So,
Whoa, 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 whoa. Stop what you're doing. Okay. If you like this video and you like the other content on my channel, please hit the like button on this video. Also, go hit subscribe like right now. And also, when you hit subscribe, click the bell so you can get notifications whenever I put out a new video. So, thanks. All right. Enjoy the rest of the video.
um, first thing is what um what are some new things that you're noticing that are different from previous sessions, whether that be when it comes to committees or certain uh bills that are being proposed, or the way that leadership in the House or the Senate are acting this year?
Well, one thing that I'm observing is an accelerated push to remove educators or legislators with education backgrounds from decision making regarding education issues. The Senate Education Committee, for example, now includes no Republicans with backgrounds in education. And a educator with a superintendent's background was replaced as caucus as a committee vice chair by a freshman legislator without an education background. Common education in the House was reduced in size, which forced us one Democrat off the committee, me. I've got a 20-year background in education and some experience on the subject. I won't be serving on common education this coming session, though, barring a last minute change of deals, because we're making that committee smaller. Another committee I'm on, the State Powers Committee, is getting larger. State Powers is the committee where we hear the bills about that are going to stop whatever President Biden is doing from happening. That's where we hear bills about like Biden's going to take 30% of the land in Oklahoma, or Biden's going to take your guns. That committee got bigger. Common education got smaller.
Hmm.
And I guess
So,
again, I would say what that means is we're reducing the visibility and the profile of public education advocates in the legislature. There are plenty on both sides of the aisle, but the major pieces of education legislation, like last year's adjunct teaching bill, were carried by legislators who didn't have education backgrounds. That's a choice, and I think that's significant.
yeah, because I I usually tell people, whether it be here in Oklahoma or in other states that follow politics, I always tell them, I said, if there's a primary between several different Republicans in a red state or a red district, you want to vote for the teacher, because the teacher's going to be, if they're bad on every other issue, they're probably still going to be better on education. And that's going to matter. Usually.
Probably,
Yeah.
usually.
And,
No.
but now they're taking them off of the actual education committees that they should be on. And that's something, because
Yeah.
here in my area, State Senate District 17, we used to be represented by Ron Sharp, who's a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and he got primaried by Shane Jett,
Mm-hmm.
very anti-education, huge supporter of Ryan Walters. So
Mm-hmm.
even if hypothetically Ron Sharp were to primary Shane Jett in 2 years and win, he probably wouldn't they probably might not even put him on an education committee because of what they're doing now, where they're taking even Republican educators off of education committees, right?
It does seem to be the pattern. Ron Sharp was a strong voice on education policy. He was very critical of Epic Youth Services, the private management organization that oversaw the enormous public dollars given to Epic charter schools. Epic's founders spent an awful lot of money to get him out of office. And of course, now the auditor is discovering that even more public dollars were mismanaged by Epic Youth Services than we previously thought. So I think that's a good example of why we want to have educators looking over issues that matter to education. Educators know what questions to ask. Educators know how a small change in education policy can have a big impact on how our schools operate. So I think we need educators, Republicans and Democrats, on those committees. And the fact that they're being pushed off the committees is disturbing. Makes me wonder if there aren't plans to move a lot of public dollars out of our public schools while the watchmen are removed from their oversight positions.
Yeah. Another question about Epic, because the other day at Full Circle, we were talking about how the numbers of students in our public schools before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and then after the pandemic, um, Epic took, I can't remember what the number was you said.
Close to a quarter of the overall student population, I think, at its
And
greatest.
and then now, after the pandemic,
Now
it's back, but even more than it was before the pandemic, right? Or
right.
Yeah.
Not every school district has recovered all of its numbers, but the latest numbers show 703,000, 2,000 more than I said at Full Circle Books. 703,000 students enrolled in our public schools. That's a record number, and it demonstrates how important our public school system is to the state of Oklahoma.
Yeah. So, in that number that it is currently is how much more than it was prior to the pandemic? Because I think you said it was quite a bit more.
We were at about 700,000 when the pandemic hit. Pandemic was hard on our public schools. It was hard on a lot of our institutions. But since the end of the lockdown, those numbers have recovered, and we've even grown. More kids are enrolled in Oklahoma public schools than ever before in our history.
Okay. Yeah, because I meet a lot of kids now, because I substitute teach at several different high schools. I meet a lot of kids that did go to Epic during that time, during the pandemic, a little bit after the pandemic, who are now back in public schools.
Yeah.
And they tell me that a lot of their credits, or all of their credits, didn't transfer over from Epic during that time. So now we have a lot of students who are behind at least a year in their schooling and are not going to be able to graduate when they were originally supposed to.
Well,
And
the problem. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. I already said it. Go ahead.
The problem of kids coming in and out of Epic has been with us for a while. There is a lot of data that suggests that a lot of kids go into Epic and they fall further behind relative to their classmates in the brick and mortar schools, so that when they return, they need additional remediation by the brick and mortar schools. I don't mean to push the point too much, because after all, every kid went online at some point during the lockdown, and that was hard for everybody. Online learning has a role. It's without a lot of supports at home, though, it can be very challenging. And teachers can see that in the form of lost social skills, developmental lags in social emotional indicators, a certain level of grit and resilience. The kids are beginning to recover now from the effects of 2020. But the first couple of years after the pandemic, a lot of teachers talked about that as the hardest years they've ever spent in education, because the kids needed support. They needed reinforcement. They'd been through something disruptive and even traumatic. And schools were the place they came together to try to rectify those things.
Um, and so what are the bills that you're proposing this session?
Oh, well, all right. I'm working on a bill for support staff raises. The Big Yellow School Bus Act would give every custodian, every food service worker, every building engineer, every bus driver a 20% raise. And for about $50 million out of the surplus revenues we've been sitting on, we could pay competitive wages to bus drivers, to the folks serving those delicious chicken fingers at lunch, the folks keeping the building lights on and the heat air conditioning running, a 20% raise. These are hardworking Oklahomans. In Tulsa, that we have people who are earning sometimes under $10 an hour working in our schools. We have skilled workers with decades of experience getting $18 an hour. It's hard to pay the rent at that salary level. And so we find that it's hard to keep good people working in our schools. Second bill would do the same thing for teachers. Teachers had a raise in 2018, and people keep talking about it like that solved all of education's problems, but it didn't. It was the right thing to do, but we should have recognized that it would encourage older teachers to retire after 3 years on the new salary levels, and that those teachers would need to be replaced. We have 4,000 emergency certification applications in the system now. That's a record. We have adjunct teachers. Schools all over Oklahoma are struggling to fill those classrooms with qualified teachers. In an inflationary economy, at a time when our neighbors have raised teacher salaries, and at a time when we're sitting on a record level of cash, this would be a good time to give teachers another raise, make it a competitive profession that young people want to go into, because they'll know they'll be able to make a living. They'll be able to take care of a family. If we do that, we can rebuild our teacher corps from the ground up with a population that looks more like the students in our classrooms today, that has better technology skills, and can better relate to the kids in the classroom. It's not the only thing we need to do, but a teacher raise would do a lot for our educators. Another thing I'm working on is free school lunch and breakfasts for every student. Right now, we spend a lot of time and effort sorting out which kids are on free and reduced lunch and which aren't. It would be much more efficient if we followed the practices that we did during the lockdown and just gave free lunch and free breakfast to every kid. That would also end the practice of lunch shaming, where you can tell which kid is poor and which kid isn't based on who qualifies for the waiver. There's some challenges here. We need to keep track of poverty in our schools, but we don't need to keep track of poverty in our schools by at the lunch line itself, where all the kids can see it. So I'm hopeful that we can guarantee every child free meals in the classroom. With so many of our kids below the poverty level, it's an important backstop for families, and it just meets the needs of the kids so that they're ready to learn. Another thing I'm looking for in regards to education amends the system by which schools are reviewed. Right now, we use an A to F system to measure the growth and performance of our schools and school districts. And one of the criteria we use is chronic absenteeism. In the post-pandemic period, it does not make sense to use attendance as an indicator. While attendance issues do correlate with problems in learning, we find that measuring chronic absenteeism is a way of singling out the poorest school districts where families have the fewest resources and penalizing them without giving them resources to actually address the problem. So I would take that out and put a qualitative measure in. School districts would be able to measure things like teacher retention or climate surveys or parent satisfaction. And that would keep them in closer touch with the communities they serve without stigmatizing poverty. I'm working on legislation that would help the Tulsa Air and Space Museum, give them a sales tax exemption on their purchases so that great institution can keep running. I'm working on an eviction bill that would require plain language for eviction notices and summons to court, so that parents and landlords could understand their rights and more smoothly handle a difficult situation. Oklahoma is a leader in evictions, unfortunately. One of the reasons families get evicted is because they don't understand their rights. We need a more responsible approach to landlord tenant relations. And one way to do it is to replace old language from the 1970s with plain language everybody can understand. Let's see, I've got a couple more bills. And they escape me right now. But I think, oh, yeah, I'm going to create a Holocaust Commission with one piece of legislation so that we can continue to promote good Holocaust education in our classrooms. I think I got to all 8. Forgive me if I missed one. Each of those bills is designed to address root problems in our schools and in our society, and their practical approaches. They're not ideological. I'm not trying to grab a lot of headlines. I just want to dig into the problems that we face today and find real common sense solutions.
Yeah. So with the eviction bill, you said that it's updating language that's in current law.
Yeah,
So what exactly? I don't know if you. I don't expect for
yeah.
you to remember it word for word, but
Mm.
what is the problem with the current language
The
versus the language that you're using to clarify with? Yeah.
The current language was written in 1971 by lawyers who were probably born in the 20s. And it was designed to court standards at a grade 14 reading level. We have plain language bills all over the country moving right now to replace antiquated language with something that says, okay, you've been served a notice. You may appear in court on such and such a date. You have a right to court access, to legal access in helping you with this process. Right now, the statute says you must use the 1971 language. We would take that out and just say you must use plain language, like it, for example, is used in other states, to communicate to tenants that they face a situation and to communicate to landlords what the process is. One of the reasons this is important is that there's like a dozen counties in Oklahoma where there are fewer than 10 lawyers, 10 lawyers total in the whole county. So even landlords don't always understand the eviction process. A plain language bill would give everybody a fair chance to understand what's going on, would level the playing field. And you know what? It would make people more responsible. Right now, if you don't understand the courts, then you don't believe in the courts. You're not going to behave responsibly because you don't think you have fair access to legal rulings. With plain language, everybody gets to understand their rights, and the courts can function the way they're intended to bring people together to mediate and resolve conflicts in the fairest and best way.
Okay. Yeah. I never really thought too much about that because there's a lot of older stuff
Sure.
that is written in ways that if it were to be served to someone or if someone were to have to read it because they had to follow it, they would say, I have no idea what this means.
Well, as a
But
history
yeah,
teacher,
yeah.
as well, I'll tell you this: as a history teacher, the first document you hear about in your world history class is a plain language bill. It's Hammurabi's tablets, the Code of Hammurabi, written thousands of years ago in cuneiform, was a plain language statement of what the law was. If Hammurabi could do it, we could do it too. The trick
Yeah.
is we've updated from cuneiform. Maybe the eviction law should also update from, because really, 1971 legalese might as well be cuneiform. Let's just update to a language that modern people can understand.
Hmm.
But you didn't expect to hear cuneiform mentioned in this podcast.
Yeah. Um, that's interesting. And yeah, oh, and the other thing you mentioned about raising pay for teachers and support staff
Mhm.
that'll be competitive with surrounding states. I took a trip to Texas last month, um, and to see some friends of mine that I hadn't seen in a number of years. And I saw a bunch of local ads talking about basically legalizing gambling, like having more casinos and stuff like that. And they would end up having more tax revenue so they could use that for education. And I asked one of my Texas friends, I said, so you guys don't even have legal gambling here? And then when you guys do get it, you're just going to use it to steal more from my teachers and our teachers from
Mhm.
Oklahoma.
Mhm.
I thought that was funny because at first I like bashed them. I was like, oh, you guys have the gall to call yourself a state even though you don't even have legal gambling in casinos.
Mhm.
Then once you get them, you're just gonna steal more from our teacher. Yeah,
Yeah, we got to
it's
watch out for Texas. We do
yeah.
export a lot of our teachers. And actually, that reminds me of one more bill that I'm running, and it's about tracking teacher certification. Uh, we need to have a clearer way of understanding who's teaching where, who's coming out of our education schools, who's qualifying for an alternative or emergency certification. And we need to use that data to understand the teacher workforce, help teachers who need more supports, and evaluate how we're doing at attracting and recruiting good teachers in the classroom. So I do have a bill that tracks teacher certifications, and this year's version of it would include the category of adjunct teachers. School districts right now have now been authorized to set up their own criteria for declaring somebody an adjunct teacher. Once they've set up those standards, they can hire people to teach in the classroom. Their thinking is that this will help attract doctors and lawyers and, I don't know, astronauts to come into the classroom who don't have a traditional background. But in practice, I'm worried that we're not going to be able to know what their qualifications are because they vary so much by district. We won't know, we won't be paying them by the same rate by the teacher contract. So most of them will probably get paid less than the average teacher. Though I could envision a few cases where, you know, the superintendent's cousin gets declared an adjunct teacher and he gets paid more. Another important thing about all of that is that if we're not keeping track of who's in the classroom, then effectively there's no fire alarm in that classroom. Terrible things
Yeah.
could be going on. The great things could be going on. We wouldn't know. So one thing we need to do is to keep better track of our teachers by keeping track of their certifications and by giving higher education access to that information so they can help promote and train and sustain our teacher workforce.
So currently right now, do we have enough info to know where adjunct teachers are more likely to be hired, like
Yeah.
rural versus urban?
Mm.
Do we have an idea of that?
Yeah, a Freedom of Information request recently revealed that there are 366 adjunct teachers serving in 138 school districts. So it's all over Oklahoma. There's a couple in my district, Tulsa, though it's not widespread, and often it's used for something like an artist in residence program. But if it's this widespread, if we have 366 teachers in 138 districts, that really starts to raise some questions because there's no central reporting on what their qualifications are, how kids are doing in their classrooms, what they're getting paid.
Yeah.
I think we need to know. The people and the public has a right to know since these are going to be public employees being paid out of taxpayer revenues.
Hmm. Yeah. Because it's definitely, I remember on Twitter I think it was about a month ago, you were going back and forth with one of the Republicans in the legislature.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I chimed in on the thread a little bit because I had to look into it a little bit more because he said we've
Mm-hmm.
already had this
Mm-hmm.
adjunct, teachers
Yeah.
before, and I was like, okay, but like it was supposed to be smaller instances, less
Yeah.
people.
Well, they were part-time.
Part
We
time, yeah.
adjuncts have always existed. They've been around for a long time. I think the original law is 40 or 50 years old, but they were part-time. So that was often like the assistant football coach, or somebody who came in to do a music class in the afternoon. Very specialized jobs. And the fact that they were part-time limited their numbers, because not everybody can do that, and prevented it from becoming a stopgap measure, a replacement for regular teachers. By making it full time, we opened up Pandora's box. And this goes back to the issue of having educators run education policy. The House and Senate authors of the bill were not career educators, and I don't think they saw all the implications. I could be wrong, but the legislator who quarreled with me on Twitter about that also seemed to not to understand the difference between a part-time adjunct and a full-time adjunct. The data that's out now that shows we have hundreds of full-time adjuncts all of a sudden all across Oklahoma, I think speaks to the point I was trying to make. I argued in committee about that bill that in a scarcity mindset, districts are going to do whatever they can to put teachers in the classroom. And if we're not addressing the issue of the teacher workforce, if we're not making it possible for school districts to hire qualified teachers for every class, well, then they're gonna grab whatever lifeline they can. It is worth investigating whether we're now using full-time adjuncts as a regular part of the teacher pipeline. If so, that's a level of qualification that might be even less. Let me say this carefully. We have a lot of good emergency certified teachers in the classroom. A lot of them are qualified and are certified in one discipline, and they receive an emergency certification to teach in another discipline. That's not the worst situation, but it's not as good as having comprehensively trained teachers in every position. But the level of scrutiny and criteria for adjunct teachers is even less than the level of scrutiny for emergency certified teachers, and that should be concerning to everybody who has kids in Oklahoma classrooms or who benefits from public education. And guess what? We all benefit from public education if it's properly resourced, properly organized, and if it's held accountable and in a transparent way.
Yeah. So with the voucher bill that came up in the state senate last session, do you think that there's a possibility that we could get a voucher bill in the House this year? Do you think Charles McCall, the speaker, is going to let it go to a vote? Last time he didn't seem like he wanted it to go to a vote. He seemed opposed to it. Do you think he's been softened up on that at all, or something
I
of
don't
that
know.
nature?
I think that's the big question. Yeah, I hope that the speaker keeps vouchers out of the House because that protects a lot of his legislators from making hard votes. Vouchers are not popular in Oklahoma. And when you poll people on it, especially in rural Oklahoma, where we don't have a lot of private schools, people say no to vouchers. But there's a powerful voucher movement working behind the scenes. A lot of money was spent against Republican educator legislators like Mark McBride and Rhonda Baker to try to replace them with people who would open the floodgates for voucher money, take a lot of public dollars out of our school system and hand them to private schools which are not transparent and not accountable in the way that public schools are. Doesn't mean private schools aren't doing a good job. I don't think they're doing a better job than our public schools, but I will say this: private schools do not have to report how they're spending their money in the same way that public schools do, and they don't have to be accountable. They don't have to provide access to every kid either. So I hope Speaker McCall keeps vouchers out because we could move a lot of public dollars into schools that won't take every kid, that'll expel a kid sometimes because they think the kid might be gay. That happened to a 7-year-old in my district. And that aren't going to have the same standards of reporting to guarantee that taxpayer dollars are spent in a reasonable fashion. We gave Epic Youth Services, a private organization, a lot of leeway with public dollars. And look what they did with it: squandered tens of millions of dollars, according to the latest audit. But at least as a management organization over a public charter school, Epic was accountable to the state auditor. Now imagine if we gave tens of millions of dollars, or hundreds of millions of dollars to private schools, some of them formed, the day after the voucher bill became law. How do we know that money will be wisely spent? I think that's a very big question.
Yeah. And the bill last year that failed in the Senate and it didn't get to go to the House, there was no other bill in the House that ended up going to a vote
Yep.
when it came to
Yep.
vouchers.
Yep.
When you said that he kind of protected a lot of his colleagues in the House on that side, whenever I was running last year, I was running against someone who's in the House who had no record of being one way or the other on vouchers. He got to be wishy-washy on his answer whenever it came to being asked about vouchers. Because I think in our debate forum that we had publicly, when asked about that, he said that he hasn't seen a voucher bill that he can support yet. And not I'm against them in general or anything of that nature. He still seemed open to the idea, but has said that he was against the one that was in the Senate this year that failed. So having to, have my stance on it, but also not accuse my opponent of being in favor of it, even though he has no real stance on it, which was still kind of a sticking point for my campaign, was that he has no real stance on it either way. I'm still glad that it didn't get to go to a vote either way to get a chance to get out of either chamber. But yeah, it would be nice to have some sort of a record on that side of the legislature so that we can be able to, protect those who are in office that are against it or get those out who are for them. But
I agree.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on and chatting with me. Is there anything else that you would like to mention, or anything that you would like for us to leave for us to go search and look up later on after
No,
they watch this video? Yeah, go
I,
ahead.
I think you've done a great job. You asked a lot of great questions. I will say that the newly elected state superintendent has argued that the top issues for him are liberal indoctrination, getting rid of woke teachers, and investigating the State Department of Education. I would respectfully maintain that the top problems are addressing the teacher shortage, not getting rid of teachers, but attracting more teachers into this noble profession, making sure that every classroom is properly resourced, and addressing the continuing effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on our schools, so that we can rebuild these vital institutions they've been under a lot of pressure. They need to be properly resourced and they need to rebuild. So I think it's time to drop the inflammatory rhetoric and embrace practical solutions for our public schools, which, as I said, now serve more kids than ever before in Oklahoma history. All right. Thank you very much for having me on your show, Gregory. It's been a pleasure. I love Green Corn Rebellion.
Thank you.